Story 1. From what I understand, due to the Respect for Marriage Act passed by Congress in 2022, if Obergefell versus Hodges is overruled, all states would still be required to recognize same-sex marriages. They would not be required to authorize new ones. For example, suppose Alabama bans same-sex marriage after Obergefell is overturned. If two men marry in Delaware and then move to Alabama, their marriage would still be legal and have the same rights as a different-sex couple. However, they could not have been married in Alabama. Overturning Obergefell on its own would not make same-sex marriage totally illegal in any part of the country. It would only limit where it can be performed. To completely ban it, courts would have to rule that the Respect for Marriage Act is unconstitutional, which also protects interracial marriage. It would still be disturbing and a sign of regression. Only a few years ago, 70% of the United States supported same-sex marriage, but the damage would be limited. Story 2. Who has gay marriage hurt? Do you know anyone who got divorced because of gay marriage? Are religious organizations forced to marry gay people? No. If a religion prevents an organization from performing the ceremony, it is not required to do so. It's similar to saying sick people need only prayer instead of medication, and insisting on being a pharmacist. How are you going to undo it? Similar to Miranda. Judges railed against it, but when given the chance to overturn it, it remained. Story 3. Republicans will like it. Everyone else will be upset about it. Story 4. Just to be clear, the Supreme Court of the United States has not decided to hear the case. A case seeking to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges was dismissed by both a federal district court and a circuit court. Every party that loses in a circuit court has the right to appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States, and about 99% of the time the Supreme Court declines to hear the case and lets the circuit court decision stand. This will only be news if the Supreme Court decides to take the case, which is unlikely. Story 5. There are a lot of people who still secretly and even openly hate gay people for being gay. I am gay, more precisely bisexual. Just as there are still many racist people, they have been soft-spoken. I remember a few years ago thinking a black friend of mine was mistaken when he said many people seemed racist around him. I was very wrong. They have been there all along. They were just muzzled. The current social momentum has made them more comfortable expressing their true hatred. I think you will be surprised by how many people will not care. Obviously, your vocal supporters will be upset, but you will see many quiet people who are indifferent, pleased, or even openly happy about the change. Why? I do not know. It does not affect them, other than reflecting some dated beliefs they may hold or a desire to be spiteful towards someone else's happiness. Story 6. How have they reacted to women being left to bleed to death and children forced to carry their rapist's baby to term? Story 7. It is sad that conservatives are so concerned about what other people do with their bodies. How about conservatives worry about their own bodies and the rest of us worry about ours? I know it is not that simple, but it should be. Story 8. Those who care have cared all along. Those who do not will not care until it hurts them, and their cognitive dissonance will prevent them from understanding what happened. Story 9. There is a small minority of Americans who want a restoration of social mores to the 1950s, when certain things were so socially taboo that people in those categories had to hide their status. As a result, those things were invisible or, at best, objects of scorn and shunning. This included homosexuality, non-normative gender identities, interracial romance, having children outside marriage, single parenting, divorce, women succeeding in business, people of non-Christian faiths, women who had abortions, and contraception controlled by women. All of these are targeted by that small but vocal minority. For them, acceptance of these people is seen as shoving it in our faces, and therefore unacceptable. If you think they will be satisfied with overturning Obergefell versus Hodges, you are not paying attention. I hope those who are paying attention will raise a strong protest. Story 10. Honestly, this would be politically toxic for Republicans. There are a lot of very hateful people in this country, but I believe more people would see this as a huge step backward. Could be at least as damaging for Republicans as the abortion issue was, if not worse. Story 11. The same people who, after Roe versus Wade was overturned, said they would never challenge same-sex marriage will now claim they will never challenge women's right to vote or interracial marriage, displaying the same misplaced confidence. Story 12. There are a few implied questions. 1. What do average or broader Americans think? My suspicion is that firm support for same-sex marriage has grown and opposition has decreased. The remaining indifferent group is smaller but more indifferent than before. Earlier they were casually supportive. 2. What will the court rule? The court will likely rule that individual clerks can decline to provide services to couples. It is unlikely the right to marry will be revoked in this case. Given the past decisions of these justices, they may agree that individuals can refuse to perform job duties based solely on personal convictions. 3. How will the public react? If clerks can individually decline, the response will be more subdued than if a state or county can refuse to issue marriage licenses to anyone they choose. The former raises a nuanced discrimination issue that forces some people to seek a second clerk. Finding another clerk is trivial in larger counties or states, but for some couples it could mean traveling for hours to find someone who will perform the service. If a state or county refuses to issue licenses, the issue is much larger, especially if they also refuse to recognize marriages performed in other states. After the abortion issue was resolved at the state level, that approach will likely be used as a model for other culture war issues. I expect individuals will be allowed to decline to participate for now, but a separate case will likely be required before states or counties can refuse to provide the service. Story 13. When the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that a woman's reproductive rights, specifically abortion, would be determined at the state level, anyone paying attention knew same-sex marriage would be next. I do not think the wider American public will care enough to do anything about it unless people get off their lazy fucking asses and actually vote. As a gay man, I have learned that my community will never be given the respect we queers are expected to give. Maybe I am wrong and just jaded, but historically this country and its populace have done an absolute shit job caring for the queer community. 1/3 of voters actively chose a literal felon and rapist, and another 1/3 of eligible voters could not be bothered to vote, even though their apathy risked another Trump presidency. So when the Supreme Court of the United States overturns Obergefell versus Hodges, I do not expect the wider American public to do a goddamn thing about it. They will let us suffer like they always have. I would love to be proven wrong, but I genuinely cannot trust my fellow Americans to do the right thing anymore. Story 14. Realistically, what are the chances the Supreme Court of the United States will take the case and decide to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges? Does this seem likely to experts? Or is it more likely that the court will decline the case as a way of saying it already rejected the claim in the Kim Davis matter? I ask genuinely. I do not have faith in the courts to uphold their own judgment, but I want to know what experts are saying and thinking. Story 15. 33% are national conservatives who will rejoice at being able to strip away religious freedom from everyone and compel them to adhere to Christian beliefs. 33% are immoral nihilists who care about nothing unless it affects them personally. 33% will be viciously opposed to this government intrusion into everyone's personal lives. Story 16. If, for some incomprehensible reason, the court decided to make marriage equality a state-by-state issue, the resulting fiasco would be disastrous. Imagine crossing the state line and losing all the legal rights that come with your marriage. Story 17. A lot of people will rejoice because they hate gay people. If there is anything I have learned about my fellow Americans lately, it is how hateful they are towards Black people, gay people, and Latino people. Story 18. I am confused. I thought they agreed to hear Kim Davis's case about her right to refuse to issue marriage licenses because of her religious beliefs. Story 19. I wish I could afford to eat this month. Well, my state legalized it, so a selective privileged lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer enclave will be fine. I wish I could afford to move to a country or state that does not hate me and want me dead. I do not have anything against gay people, and I do not see a problem with leaving the issue to state decisions. Well, if you do not like it in a state where it was not legalized, then they can just leave. I wonder which landmark civil rights case the Roberts Court will overturn next. Interracial marriage, desegregation, or sodomy laws. Probably whichever one regressive activist lawyers and judges affiliated with the Federalist Society can pursue next. Story 20. They aren't coming for marriage equality. They are coming for Lawrence versus Texas and for the return of sodomy laws. Story 21. If the Supreme Court reviews every important prior decision and overturns each one, how long before it declares the Constitution itself unconstitutional? Story 22. I think the Democratic Party will respond with a fundraising email, as they did after Roe versus Wade. Story 23. The religious Supreme Court does not care what we think. 90% of the United States could stage an around-the-clock parade in the Capitol, and it would not matter. In their minds, a book written by ancient sheep herders takes precedence over everything. Story 24. This is how the public reacts to most things. The majority will not care, as it does not affect them directly. Story 25. As always, a vast portion of Americans will not notice until it affects them. Until then, they will praise the fearless leader. Story 26. Apathy. This country is lost. More than half the population cannot be bothered to pay attention as Nazis take over. Story 27. There will likely be protests, but most Americans will not take action. Based on reactions to the insurrection attempt and the Roe versus Wade decision, it seems the government can act with impunity and nothing will happen. Story 28. 31% will cheer. 40% will not care. 29% will be angry. This is the same as every other partisan issue. Story 29. My predictions. States that kept abortion rights will likely pass laws to keep same-sex marriage legal, while states with full abortion bans will invalidate same-sex marriage. There will be general outrage, but as usual, Make America Great Again supporters and most red states will assert their moral superiority and celebrate the loss of rights as a win. Dumbass Trump said he wanted America as it was 100 years ago, and he is working to make that happen. Story 30. People will shake their fists, post on Facebook, and maybe take a little walk and call it a protest. Then no one will do anything meaningful except lie down and take it. Story 31. Conservatives tend to take the liberal side on issues that will affect them or people they care about. Trump can denounce transgender people as much as he wants because, at half of 1% of the population, transgender people are few enough that many people, particularly older and rural residents who make up the core conservative base, do not personally know anyone who is openly transgender. Same-sex marriage has been the law of the land for a decade. There are roughly 10 times as many gay people as transgender people, and most are open about their sexuality. Far more people have a friend or relative whose marriage would be affected by a ruling against same-sex marriage, and they are likely to be deeply offended by anything less than enthusiastic support for the issue. Story 32. This is a somewhat misleading way to frame it. They are only considering whether to grant certiorari to hear Kim Davis's appeal, not the actual merits of the case. I think it is very unlikely that they will grant certiorari. Story 33. People won't do anything. They didn't act when abortion was overturned, and they will not act here. It's sickening, but Americans are too docile to hold those in power accountable. Story 34. Man, your country is undoing every good thing it ever did. Story 35. They walk through their cities and yell when it is convenient. They did the same when children were torn from their families and placed in detention, and they did so again last weekend. Story 36. My husband and I were married in Colombia, and I petitioned to bring him to the United States. He is now a United States citizen. I cannot get clarity on our situation. The United States recognizes our marriage performed abroad, but what would happen if marriage equality were overturned? I feel we may not have the same protections as someone with a United States marriage license, yet we cannot remarry in the United States because our marriage is already recognized. Can anyone shed light on this? Story 37. Honestly, if the Supreme Court actually overturned Obergefell versus Hodges, the reaction would be massive. Most Americans, about 70%, support same-sex marriage now, so it would feel like the court was dragging the country backward. You would see huge protests, fundraisers, marches, and a great deal of political energy devoted to protecting marriage rights at the state level. There would definitely be some people who would celebrate, especially in conservative or religious circles, but they would be a minority compared with the overall backlash. It would also further erode people's trust in the court. If something as seemingly settled as marriage equality can be undone, what would be next? It would reinforce the perception that the court is becoming more political than judicial. Story 38. I am probably like Susan Collins, very concerned. We did not vote for this. What bothers me most is that this is legally a clear case of something that should not be overturned. It is nationally popular and would make the legal situation across the country very murky. What happens to people who marry in blue states when they move to red states? Would their marriages still be recognized? These questions would arise and are a big reason why adhering to precedent matters. Story 39. I think the solution that would resolve most issues is to eliminate the legal distinction between marriage and non-marriage by removing government involvement. Any current incentives for marriage, such as tax benefits or hospital visitation, would instead be handled through private contracts between the two parties. Story 40. I think there would be significant blowback, frankly a lot more than from Roe versus Wade. Public opinion on abortion has remained largely unchanged, with many people on both sides, assuming polls are not asking leading questions. There are many engineered abortion polls designed to produce a desired result. By contrast, opinion on same-sex marriage shifted from majority opposition to strong support in just a few years. This lawsuit exists because there is still opposition, but you do not see people campaigning on promises to restore traditional marriages for a reason. Aside from political sentiment, I also think Obergefell versus Hodges has a much stronger legal basis than Roe versus Wade did. Roe v. Wade's argument that abortion could not be regulated because of a right to privacy between a patient and a doctor, while other areas of medicine are heavily regulated, was always weak, to be honest. With the Respect for Marriage Act, the Supreme Court of the United States would have to come up with a strong justification to limit or overturn that decision. Story 41. I never understand the Christian mentality on this. If you truly despise these people, let them get married. There is nothing like losing half of your belongings. Story 42. There is no reason same-sex couples should be denied civil marriage, which establishes family status, next of kin, and inheritance rights. Religious organizations should, in my opinion, have wide latitude to decide whom they marry in their ceremonies. Same-sex couples should receive the standard benefits of civil marriage. Story 43. If Obergefell were overturned, I think most people would be shocked. 70% of Americans support same-sex marriage now. Story 44. As an outsider looking in, I always thought it was strange that so many fundamental social institutions were imposed by the United States Supreme Court. It is a flimsy legal pathway because it is merely an interpretation that can be changed at any time. Look at what happened with Roe versus Wade. How many states have laws that will preserve same-sex marriage even if Obergefell versus Hodges is overturned? Story 45. Americans will decide to hate gay people again. It is as simple as that. It will give just enough permission to say that equal rights for gay people did not work. We tried it for 10 years, and it produced inflation and illegal immigration. That will be the logic. Story 46. There will be fireworks, not the good kind. People do not forget when rights are taken back. It would be the loudest social whiplash the United States has seen in years. Story 47. Sounds like the Supreme Court is working for the orange guy. Is this the same court that granted him immunity? Story 48. People will be angry for a week, and then they will be back at work on Monday, sending kitten memes back and forth as if nothing has changed. Story 49. The Supreme Court of the United States is considering whether Kim Davis can be liable for refusing to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. If the court takes up the case, which I strongly doubt, there is virtually no chance it would be used to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges because the case is not a good vehicle for that result. Story 50. I would support physically overturning courthouses. Dig them up, flip them over, and knock them down. If they do not care about us, then I will not care about them. Story 51. What is the difference between open fields and hedges, and why should I care? Story 52. Republicans are frequently in the news for rape and other sexually deviant behavior. If a large Make America Great Again event happens in a red state, the Grindr app comes to a screeching halt because so many Republicans are on it looking for a one-night stand. Story 53. The brave American people will fight fiercely for their constitutionally recognized adult relationships, just as they rose up to defend a woman's constitutional right to abortion and control over her own sovereign body when the corrupt Supreme Court of the United States eliminated it. Story 54. The court does not care how the public reacts. I am not sure how that helps here. Story 55. As always, people will respond with a whimper and a sigh. Story 56. Apart from the reactions of the public, what are the real-world implications? According to Google, there are almost 1 million same-sex married couples in the United States. Would these marriages be annulled? What about custody of children? Presumably, there would be considerable legal problems regarding property rights, investments, and insurance policies. Or would existing marriages simply be grandfathered in while no new same-sex marriages are sanctioned? Story 57. They set a date to decide whether they will take up a new case that could lead to a review of Obergefell. On November 7th, they will meet to decide whether to review the new case on the merits or to leave it alone. They will not review Obergefell on November 7th. Story 58. What is the red line for Americans who have been meekly accepting these horrible things so far? There have been protests, but they do not affect the criminals running the government. I wonder what the red line will be. Story 59. People are too focused on their phones, watching artificial intelligence videos of the President of the United States crop dusting feces over Americans. America's brain rot is too far gone because of smartphones and artificial intelligence. Story 60. They should skip it and go straight to love. That's the one Thomas wants to see overturned. Google it. I promise that's funny. Story 61. Does Thomas really believe that they are not going to come after his marriage next? Story 62. Imagine if we actually allowed individual freedom in our country. Wouldn't that be a dream? Story 63. Honestly, the government needs to get the hell out of marriage. But I do not expect any changes. Story 64. First they will succeed in doing this and then they will target interracial marriage. I'd bet money on it because I'm in an interracial marriage. When you've experienced what supporters of the Make America Great Again movement have done to us, you'd be convinced too. Several recent polls show that a shocking 13% of Republicans are opposed to interracial marriage. That's less than those opposed to same-sex marriage, of course, but still more than 1 in 10. They are at least as homophobic as they are racist. They will not stop here, and they will not leave it up to the states. They control many institutions and are pressing ahead with a far-right agenda. Look what they've accomplished in less than a year. Story 65. To be honest, I feel like people are continuing to sleepwalk as our rights are being systematically stripped away, and part of me is afraid that if it is overturned, it will only be a blip and people will continue with their lives as if nothing is wrong. I hope this is finally the wake-up call everyone needs, but lately it feels bleak. Story 66. It will be overturned, unfortunately. As for the American people, they will take it up the ass without much trouble, like they do everything else. Quite frankly, they're hardly worth saving anymore. Story 67. The reaction would be outrage, and then nothing would happen to affect change in the opposite direction. Story 68. If I married in a state a few years ago that is likely to ban new same-sex marriages, will my existing marriage there remain legal? Story 69. Gilead. Righto. It's time to buy out my local liquor stores for reasons. Story 70. Title is misleading. They are scheduled to determine whether a case can be heard by the court. Even if they hear it, there is no guarantee they will overturn it. Story 71. Americans are apathetic cowards. Most won't care, and the minority won't have enough support to fight back. This country is becoming an incestuous, hillbilly version of Russia. Story 72. Overturning Obergefell would ignite constitutional conflict and mobilize both sides in a nation where 71% support marriage equality. Yet 33 states have trigger laws. Story 73. I do not understand why total strangers want to dictate how other people act in their private lives. How do two people getting married on the other side of the country have any impact on your life at all? Gay couples exist, and that seems to enrage the haters. Whatever happened to mind your own business? Story 74. My guess is no real reaction. Some people will say someone else should do something. Story 75. The wider American public will passionately express concern about the choice of the latest Super Bowl halftime show headliner. They will also vigorously debate the decor of the White House Charlie Kirk Memorial Ballroom. Story 76. Republicans want to ban gay marriage because it is just too tempting. Story 77. Probably the same way they reacted to Roe versus Wade, shocked, and then this regime will continue to impinge upon people's religious freedom and the rights of straight white Christian men. Story 78. This sounds like Republicans trying to extract as much tax revenue from people as possible. Half the reason people bother getting married is the financial incentives. Story 79. It is not a question of if, but when it will be overturned. They also want to challenge interracial marriage. Story 80. This is my understanding. States issue marriage licenses through county authorities. A marriage certificate is granted when two people join in legal matrimony. Many states acknowledge the right of anyone to marry anyone else. Compare this to driver's licenses. No one needs a separate license for each state. That would be absurd, unmanageable, and unenforceable. A marriage that is legal in one state is therefore legal in all states, just as a driver's license is. A right granted in one state that applies nationwide is valid in all other states. If Obergefell is overturned, loving will quickly follow. Folks, we are not regressing to 1950s America. It is going to fall all the way back to pre-Civil War. If you are cisgender and white, you will be all right. Everyone else will be fucked. Story 81. Remember when nominees said Roe was settled law during their confirmations and lied? Story 82. Republicans will ban gay and interracial marriage, prevent women and anyone who is not a white land-owning straight Christian male from voting, and bring back slavery. Story 83. Sorry, I cannot help refine content that disparages a protected group. Neutral rephrasing. Many people do not seem capable of responding to events anymore. Story 84. Americans will probably respond the same way they did when the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump was free to break every law without consequences, also known as giving him immunity to basically everything. People will say it is horrible, but ultimately nothing will be done. Story 85. It does not matter how they react because there is no longer a mechanism by which to stop any of this. Story 86. America will take to the streets on a Saturday in public spaces from 9 to 12. Please take your signs when you are done. By Sunday morning it is like nothing ever happened. Story 87. The left will howl, the right will try to walk it back as some bullshit states' rights thing, and after a month no one will care except the people it affects. Sadly, this seems to be the way of the United States these days. Look at Roe. Story 88. I remember thinking it was bittersweet when the Supreme Court decided Obergefell versus Hodges. It was clear they stretched their reasoning to justify the outcome. The decision came when same-sex marriage was at the forefront of the American conversation. Companies were advocating for it in their products, and legislation to codify the right seemed imminent. By legislating from the bench on such shaky grounds, the court halted the national conversation, disrupted momentum toward legalization, and removed pressure on the legislature to enact the law people were calling for. All substantive due process cases are shaky at best. The court should decide based on what the law is, not what it should be. If Obergefell is overturned, I hope national support for codifying the right to same-sex marriage, the way it should have been done in the first place, will return. Story 89. They reacted the same way to every other step in this demolition of their country. By standing by until the next thing is wrecked and we can ask the question again. Story 90. I work with someone in a same-sex marriage who voted for Donald Trump. I just don't understand some people. Story 91. They reacted the same way when someone tried to overthrow the government, or when it became clear that Trump had been caught sexually abusing children, or when he lost a sexual assault case, or when he stole classified documents, lied about it, and hid them from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or when Republican Party operatives rounded up United States citizens, sent them to South Sudan and El Salvador, and refused to bring them home. America is too far gone. It is populated by completely anti-civic, gullible, lying bigots who literally could not give a rat's ass about democracy. The Republican Party's current stance is that the United States is not a democracy, as shown by tweets from Ted Cruz and Mike Lee. I am completely convinced that if Trump announced a plan to round up gay people and send them to work camps, Americans would not bat an eye if the stock market rose by 0.05% that day. I left the country for good. Story 92. Many people will not react properly because the average United States citizen was not taught about the 14th Amendment or about civil rights. History courses in kindergarten through 12th grade cover the basics of the Constitution, primarily the Bill of Rights, and college is expensive. So many people do not study the extensive applications of the 14th Amendment or its meaning. Overturning Obergefell versus Hodges would be like undoing more than 100 years of civil rights advancements and could theoretically mean that any case granting minority rights based on the 14th Amendment could be overturned. Examples include Obergefell versus Hodges, Brown versus Board of Education, Loving versus Virginia, and others. Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization already set a precedent. It held that the Constitution does not protect a right to abortion under a general right to privacy, and that abortion was not covered under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. Because abortion raises different issues than same-sex marriage or discrimination cases, the decision was not treated as seriously as it should have been. Story 93. The vast majority of Americans would hate it. But when has that stopped the government? To be serious for a minute, it would mean state governments would not be required to sanction new marriages but would have to respect existing marriages from other states. Until the Respect for Marriage Act is considered unconstitutional by the Supreme Court and taken off the books, which would mean interracial marriage would no longer be protected, not much would change except for people seeking to marry in red states. The Respect for Marriage Act being declared unconstitutional sounds far-fetched, but consider how many things the current president and those aligned with him, including the Supreme Court, have done that would have sounded far-fetched a year ago. Consider that a Supreme Court ruling allowing immigration and customs enforcement to use racial profiling would have sounded like the onion a year ago, but here we are. It is good that marriage is enshrined in law, but I have completely lost trust in American institutions. If Trump wants it badly enough, he will fight to get it done, legal or not, moral or not. Story 94. Crazy how this cunt is still causing problems a decade later. Story 95. No. They set a date to review whether they will take the case. If they do, they will hear the people involved and make a decision. Story 96. In 2009, I thought this country was not ready to elect a black man as president, but it surprised me. It happened twice. Apparently that was a dog whistle to racists and bigots, who woke up in 2016 and have since dragged us back to the old ways with a sprinkle of fascism. This is happening all over the world, so I do not know what to think anymore. I am simply tired of these people running the United States. Story 97. Chick-fil-A has spent millions trying to criminalize homosexuality in the United States and especially in Africa. Given the rabid support for this restaurant, Americans clearly care less about marriage equality than they do about a pack of chicken tenders. Story 98. Once they succeeded in overturning Roe versus Wade, the massive network they had built to achieve that needed a new purpose. Otherwise, all that money would go away. They eliminate gay marriage, then interracial marriage, and then they will look for another target. They must continually find new causes to fight, otherwise they will stop getting paid. Story 99. The same way we did for overturning Roe versus Wade. Get up and go to work tomorrow and continue living our lives as if nothing happened. Story 100. Dave Rubin will suck it up and say that, if his marriage is an affront, states should have the right to reject or ban it. Story 101. I believe we are on the verge of some states seceding from the Union. The West Coast, in particular, is politically and culturally very different from the rest of the country. Story 102. Many people will express outrage on social media and join marches, but few will take meaningful action. Elections will remain close. Story 103. How could they justify interracial marriage? What are the parameters? 10% black acceptable? 25% not? The Nazis had their numbers for determining Jewish blood. Is that where they are heading? Story 104. Unwinding tariffs was too hard, but this won't be? Get the fuck out of here. Story 105. I have family and friends who are gay, and I live in a very conservative state. I openly support and adore them. They are fun, sweet, and make the world a better place. Story 106. I do not know what I predict for the wider American public in the United States. The overturning of the right to marry was the threshold I set in December 2024 that made me decide it was time to leave. Story 107. We will go back to 2004. Massachusetts will again become the same-sex marriage destination. Story 108. As a gay man, I still do not understand why my being gay is an issue for straight people. Most gay people will not bother you, so please stop bothering me. Story 109. Why does the party that insists on small government and respect for the Constitution push to enforce its religious ideals on others and have the government tell people whom they can and cannot marry? If you do not like gay marriage, do not have one. Story 110. They will not. Apathy and greed run deep. The human voice cries for more while we forsake our fellow people in the face of impending doom as a global society. Hope is being crushed by indifference. Story 111. The right will cheer, the left will cry. The gay right will be confused and angry. The gay left will be upset. The thread is over, guys, we can go home. Story 112. As a Canadian, I am truly embarrassed by the state of our country right now. The United States is much worse. It is baffling how a country can fall so far. Story 113. The court has not set a date to consider overturning Obergefell. On November 7th, the court will discuss whether to grant Kim Davis's appeal of her defeat in the Sixth Circuit, or whether the lower court judgment will stand. She needs the approval of 4 justices for the case to be heard. She lost 3-0. The panel included a George W. Bush appointee and a Donald Trump appointee. Story 114. According to my conservative brother, who insists the government would never do that, it would be the line for revolution because the government would be truly fascist at that point. It is wild that it is not a bridge too far until it impacts people you actually know and care about. Story 115. Jesus fucking Christ. This subreddit has become depressing. Yes, the United States is going to shit. Can we stop asking rhetorical questions about it and go back to asking the silly gendered questions that have been asked and answered 1,000 times? Story 116. It is going to be chaotic. Mass protests, legal battles, and a large increase in culture war tensions. Most people in favor of marriage equality will react strongly, but some will celebrate. Do you think it will actually sway politics in the long term, or will it just make headlines? Story 117. Is the government determining who you can marry? Is this the small government the right keeps portraying? That's fucking weird. Story 118. How have insurance companies not successfully lobbied or paid to get federal recognition of same-sex marriage passed? It would be the easiest money grab for them, and I am genuinely surprised their greed had limits in this case. Story 119. How will the wider American public react? From what I see, the public will remain passive as all their constitutional rights are taken away by Make America Great Again. Story 120. People who watch Fox News will have no idea it even happened. Story 121. At this point, there is no clear answer. Everything is in chaos. Culturally, the United States seems to be moving toward an East versus West Germany pivot. Blue states will fight for progress and provide better education, healthcare, and overall life outcomes, while red states will treat their residents as products to be exploited, with fewer safety nets and fewer opportunities for average and low-income people. As much as I despise the racist, inbred Christian fascist groups, I feel really bad for the other people stuck in red areas who cannot afford to leave or who have family they need to care for and thus cannot easily move. They are the ones affected, and they do not deserve this. That said, I have no sympathy for Make America Great Again or for voters who supported fascist conservative politicians. I hope they get the life they voted for. Story 122. It would add another item to the already long list of reasons for the Pacific states to separate from the Union. Story 123. Republicans hate anything that makes life better, so I am concerned about this. Story 124. Genuine question. Is the court doing this on its own, or did someone apply to change it? Story 125. I would be fascinated to see how this affects marriage for transgender people. If their paperwork says they are female, then it should not count as gay marriage, right? Story 126. The government should not be involved in marriage in the first place. Story 127. Defense lawyers need to tie it to the Loving versus Virginia decision so Thomas will think twice. Thomas does not care about how his marriage appears. He cares only about what his billionaire overlord tells him to do when voting. Story 128. It's so fucking stupid that we all get one go around on this planet, and there are people who give so much of a shit about how you live your life that they will outlaw it. Be serious. Story 129. Many people may approve because some appear indifferent to others' suffering. What else is new? Nothing good seems possible. The future feels like permanent oppression. Sports betting news at 11. Story 130. Pretty much how we reacted to Roe versus Wade. Disgusted but not surprised. Story 131. They are not deciding whether to overturn it. They are deciding whether to hear arguments about overturning it. Story 132. The sentiment against Republicans will grow. Mostly, of course, in the outspoken regions of the United States, but also in quieter areas. Either nothing happens or people start freaking out, because it would be undeniable proof that the government wants to come into your home. I think protecting marriage equality would require substantial public pressure beforehand. After that, there is little left to be done. Heterosexuals have only recently started to care. I do not trust them to sustain the effort. Story 133. Republicans will cheer and Democrats will say it is terrible, but then quickly move on with their lives. Story 134. If anything, I don't think anyone should have a legally recognized marriage, and everyone should be treated as single for tax purposes. Story 135. Apparently, the court will decide on November 7th whether to hear a case that implicates Obergefell. 4 votes are required to grant review, and if the case is fully briefed and argued, 5 justices would need to vote to overturn Obergefell. I do not see 5 votes in favor, and I doubt there will be 4 votes to place the case on the court's docket. The court's decision in Dobbs, which overturned Roe, is instructive. In Dobbs, the majority emphasized that much of the reasoning relied on a lack of detrimental reliance. The court concluded that people were not structuring their lives based on Roe. That conclusion cannot be applied to Obergefell, where millions of same-sex couples have married and arranged their lives on the expectation that Obergefell is the law. Those decisions by millions of Americans make the likelihood of overturning Obergefell extremely small. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.